Hello, it is October 14th, and can you believe that 7 months ago we entered into this pandemic? We've entered into a time of change, and we've entered into a time of resolution, and we've entered into a time that we can do some self-reflection. It's been probably 6 weeks to 2 months since I have been on social media. I've taken the time to finish writing a book, to do some contracts, to initiate some speaking engagements, to do some podcasts and some inner reflection. And today my first talk on coming back to social media is, can you handle the fact that racism exists in religion? When I left social media, and my program was called Sunday Morning Live, there were between 1,400 and 1,700 people that would watch it every Sunday or during the week or recast it. And yet I thought it was time to leave that. I am now going to be part of a television network called the Now Network, which will air my program called Now on Sunday, which will be on a cable network on the East Coast, part of the Western Europe and some parts of Africa. And then I will post some things on Facebook. And we'll see how it goes, because it is a religious network. And it came as a result of people watching my Facebook feeds, and they already know my stance on homosexuality, my stance on addiction, my stance on same-sex marriage, my stance on spirituality as a verse to religion, and we'll see how it goes. And between now and the first of the year will be a series of programs that we will see how it's going to work for me. And if it does, then every Sunday, beginning the first of the year, will be a half-hour program called Now on Sunday. I want to talk today about God, white superiority, the government, and you. Those of you who have listened to me before, you know I have said energy can never be destroyed, only altered or changed. What I have said about God is this, and this is the one thing I know 100% about God, is that God is love, period. God cannot, will not, does not create anything unlike God's self. And anything that shows up unlike God's self does not belong to God, but often is placed in the category of religion, which God gets the blame for. Galatians 5:14 says this: the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. This one command. It doesn't say that if you smoke or drink or run with boys and girls or do. It says this one command, that you love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we live in a country that has so many things wrong with it that need to be fixed. And energy, which I've said has never been destroyed, is a consciousness that often gets buried and takes on different shapes and forms. And we live in a country centered around whiteness, if we're going to be honest, that disregards how the image of God, which is love, is manifest on non-white bodies. And if we don't take the responsibility for what has happened in America, if we don't take the responsibility, we are not willing to see the image of God throughout the world. From the early days of the colonies, the colonists employed religio-cultural categories to simply and signify that Europeans meant Christian and Native American and African meant heathen. And by the mid-17th century, colonies began to develop slave codes to police the African bondage. In fact, if you really do some research in history, when we look at the Bill of Rights, the second Bill of Rights, the right to bear arms, was actually written so that the slave patrols had the right to carry guns to patrol the counties and the roads, those the slaves wouldn't run away. Slaves were not allowed to have arms. And the Africans during that time were defined as chattel. They were a private property and they were on the same level as livestock. You know, dogs, pigs, cows, maybe even cats. Cows, maybe even they got more of a priority because they could be sold at a great price. And there became a concept of hereditary heathenism. And that means that if your mothers and your fathers and your heritage were African, that you also was a heathen. And during the 1600s, there was a controversy as to whether Africans could actually be Christians or not. In fact, in the General Assembly of 1667, there is a statute that was put into the law that is Key Slavery Statutes of the Virginia General Assembly. Because you see, when the 13 colonies came into being, Virginia was the biggest one, and the other colonies derived their leadership and their government from the colony of Virginia. Now, out of the first 15 presidents, 11 came from the state or the colony of Virginia. So, in looking at this, the enslaved Christians were encouraged, and this is a quote, encouraged to be content with their spiritual liberation and obedient as slaves. And that was actually written into law of the Congress of the colony of Virginia. And a lot of this was done 100 years or so before the Declaration of Independence even. And we like to think that Columbus was the one that came here in 1492, but 100 years before Columbus even came here, even more than that, was the Scandinavian explorers that came. But when Columbus came and Magellan came and Cabrillo came and all of these explorers came, they came bringing the white Western religion with them. Now remember this though, it wasn't until 1611 that the King James Version of the Bible, which is considered the authority by Christians, you know, not long ago I was speaking and a lady said, well, if the King James is good enough for me, it was good enough for Jesus is good enough for me. I didn't know how to tell her that Jesus didn't speak the King James Version. And so when the explorers came, they had bits and pieces of various gospel entities that they built their doctrine on. But their motivation was land, and their motivation was to gain wealth. So in the early days when the explorers came and they found the Native Americans, and I believe it wasn't until 1830 that the Native American Removal Act was instituted, which the Native American Removal Act would remove all of the natives and place them past west of the Mississippi River. So what we did in our consciousness was we slaughtered and killed and raped the American Indians that owned the land, and then we decided to make a deal with them. But they were considered indigenous and considered to be heathen also. Now, granted this, they were spiritual. They listened to the earth. They understood that this is Mother Earth and that we are custodians of Mother Earth. And being custodians of Mother Earth, it is our job to watch over Mother Earth. Oh yeah, we've done a good job of it, haven't we? Now we have climate change with fires happening everywhere, hurricanes, earthquakes, and all parts, tsunamis, all parts of the world, just because of the greed. You know, and even though we've given land to the Native American Indians, the indigenous ones, the ones in the Dakotas, we have difficulty with because we want to tear up their land and do fracking. So that's a whole different talk. That's where we're going. So we began to evangelize the Native Americans. That was the first step. And why do we evangelize people? It's because when we evangelize people and we can get them to believe what we want them to believe, then we can control, dominate, and manipulate them. You see, the Indians, being spiritual, okay, not religious, spiritual, they worshiped God, which they viewed as the sun. They had a trinity. They knew about the trinity, the moon, the stars, all of this. They knew leadership. They knew how to put their ear to the ground, and as the buffalo would go, they knew how to follow. This is all spiritual beings, spiritual practices. They knew how to go out and let the wind touch their face and to know where to move their encampment to the next spot, because they believed the earth was not to be owned by anybody, unlike the white Europeans that came over who wanted to conquer. But if we're not going to slay you and kill you, we're going to take your spirit from you. So eventually, we had to Christianize everybody. And like I said earlier, I'm not against God, because God is my best friend. And God is love. And I often say this: if you knew who walked beside you every day on the path that you have chosen, you would never doubt or fear again. But most of us have taken religion and made it God rather than God. Racism in our society and in the church exist as a result of people turning away from the teachings of Scripture. And to our shame, and too often in the past, Christians have endorsed bogus theology of radical superiority that was used to justify discrimination, apartheid, and slavery. According to the Church of England tradition, Christian brothers and sisters could not enslave one another. Now, there were three basic churches that came here. It was the Church of England, and it was the Church of Scotland, Presbyterian Church of Scotland, and it was the Holy Roman Catholic Church that came. But the Anglicans of the Virginia General Assembly broke decisively with the tradition by condemning their black brothers and sisters into perpetual slavery, and even wrote into law that it was God's will. God had ordained that the white people be the ones that ruled over the black people. It would be ignorant to say that politics is not influenced by religion. I mean, we're doing judicial hearings right now, right? Why is it important to say about this lady that's a candidate that she's a woman of faith? What does faith have to do with how the law is read and interpreted? Absolutely nothing, unless you want that person to be able to bend the law and have the law go to what you want it to as a politician. I don't remember that we've ever had a candidate for a justice who was an atheist. Wonder why that could be. Unfortunately, politics have been influenced from religion right from the beginning. Many white Christians actively have participated in racism, and many more have sat idly by every inch of American life. Want to know what I'm talking about? What about the kids that were put in cages, the Mexicans? Nobody said a word. Brutal racial injustice would not have persisted as long as it did without the silence and the outright support of one of the most significant institutions in America, the Christian Church. Now, Martin Luther King, in my research, and this is just an overall today, this isn't really getting into the nitty-gritty, which I will get into if they still allow my talks to be televised. Martin Luther King said this, Martin Luther King Jr., like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of the air and light, and justice must be exposed. With all tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. So the Declaration of Independence cites that the Creator has bestowed inalienable rights on all of us. But religious influence American politics to a degree not seen like any developed country. Despite the constitutional firewall of the difference between the church and state, national politicians have ever made a major speech without invoking religion. Religion has been the most exploited by politicians to cause riots. Do I need to name names on this? To excite one set of people against another on the basis of religion. So what am I saying to you? In our consciousness, in who we are, it's time. You know, Bono said this, religion is what you have once the Holy Spirit has left the room. We were created in love, because of love, and are love. When I come from a place in my heart of love, I do not put my foot on your neck. I do not break into your house and start shooting. But also, I do not kick windows out, and I do not start stealing from you, and I don't rape and mug you. But as long as we have the consciousness that we have, that still pervades here in our country, of white superiority, and then there's the others, and if you're an other, you're not quite as good as superiority. You say, you know, you're out of your mind thinking this. Really? Really, 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 really? Okay, I want you to go by this set of 12 Bible stories, you know, that you're going to read to your kids. And so you have a little black child here, you're reading through. Every person in that book is white. You go to church and you look on the walls and this image of Jesus is always white. White, white, white. And you know we have the image of God. God is white, Jesus is white, the angels are white, heaven is white. And if we want to talk about sin, it's your heart is black like sin. So in our language, in our energy, we make this distinction, even based on color, of what your worth is. When the truth is, that God, the Creator, has created all of us in love, from love, and we are love, regardless of what the color of our skin is. And the color of our skin needs to be an asset and a blessing to us. And the rest of us need to recognize that. And as I said, when I was doing my broadcast at one time, kindness is the language that the blind can see. Kindness is the language the deaf can hear. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And can I say this to you? Look for God in the eyes of your neighbor. I don't know when I'm going to do another post. This is going to be posted on the Now television network. Maybe they'll kick me off before I'm even on. I do not know. I am in transition myself. And I say to you, in the month of October, what are you transitioning to in the year 2021?